On the phone, she said, "When you reach the apartment, just follow my tears," but it was a trail of soapy water that led him down the narrow hall. He was careful as he followed the translucent beads. He sidestepped the thicker ones and walked slowly so the little domes of liquid wouldn't shift and absorb into the green wood panels. The bedroom door was open and he could see through to the master bathroom, its heavy black door also precariously ajar, where his own blurred reflection stared back at him through the mirror's filter of condensation. The clerical collar was tight around his unshaven neck. He scratched at his 3-day accumulation of stubble. Wearing his long black cassock, he looked both out of place and, strangely, as if he belonged here in this darkened apartment, which appeared to have been furnished for a singular kind of oblique mood. It was as if he had become the subject of a disturbing oil painting. What would he have called it? Something like The Last Rites of Maria Ramos Mendoza. That was the name she had given him on the phone. Perhaps she was an artist. Her voice was cold, mechanical. She told him she was an atheist, but she had no alternate explanation for the haunting in the apartment, that a diabolic entity had taken root in the unit, that she was being driven to insanity, that she was being watched, that she needed him tonight. Most of the people he exploited were Latino immigrants. Her name raised no suspicion. But why assert her atheism? Nothing here was right. The clergyman angle had been his side hustle for 8 long years. The gypsy cat burglars called him the father. Most days he went by Jack. House calls were his mo. He used high-grade burner phones and a Lithuanian rerouting app to scalp calls from the diocese. Advertising himself was too risky. He only ran the short game. The payouts were often meager, and when those who were spiritually afflicted didn't make a sizable donation to the parish, he'd have to hit the same spot for the electronics and gold and silver after rigging an entry point. The building hadn't looked wrong to him. Just another vertical tower covered in rickety fire escapes with a gutter-like moat of an alleyway jammed within the crowded downtown. The lobby walls were a vague yellow, the color of aging plastic. The apartment was 14 flights up. The front door opened on its own after he knocked. He sat on the edge of the bed as he stared into the bathroom. She was naked on the floor of the standing shower, hot water still running. He thought it was suicide at first. Sure, call up the holy man, get somebody to find her body. But her throat had been slashed wide open. Nobody checked out like that. It wasn't a clean job either, the kind done with a razor in one stroke. Somebody had cut deep and practically removed her jugular. Blood ran down her chest and stomach and pooled around the edges of the drain between her legs. The cell phone on the nightstand rang. The rose-gold iPhone vibrated across the shellacked surface and fell to the floor. He backed out of the room and through the hall. The photographs and watercolors she had framed along the way looked hideous to him now. He passed into the stairwell and didn't bother to grip the knob with his sleeve to close the front door. The neighbors were fighting a few doors away. The fight carried through the walls. At least one was fighting while the other kept screaming. The walls were thin. Jack's path was blocked. The professional was descending the upper steps cleaning a short fillet blade with a dark blue bandana. Everything else about his clothing was black, from his disposable shoe covers to his powderless latex gloves, even the stocking cap around his scalp. He finished cleaning the blade and pocketed the bandana. "Evening, Reverend," he said. His face was exposed, but Jack didn't recognize him. "Evening," he said. "Why don't you step back inside the apartment and we'll talk?" He gestured with the knife. Jack shrugged. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not a reverend. I don't care what you are. These kinds of hired guys, usually ex-police or ex-military, were like the plague to a con artist. Most of them rarely spoke." He didn't like how much this one had to say. Talkers were usually sadists. He came a few steps closer with only the knife in hand. "Get back in there." He let his head drop in defeat. "Okay," he said, reaching into the hollowed pocket of his cassock to unholster the Sig Sauer he had strapped to his back. He drew the P938 and pulled the trigger. The spent cartridge danced along the floor like a loose bottle cap. The professional's knees buckled before he fell down the concrete steps. There was no blood, just smoke and the ring of tinnitus. The son of a bitch wore a vest. The professional drew his own pistol from an ankle holster and fired back along the incline of the steps. Jack stood in a haze of plaster dust. The building's foundation seemed to shudder amid the sporadic gunfire. He retreated into the unit and slammed the entrance shut. He started to work the many chains and bolts affixed to the doorsill when a single shot burst the peephole and grazed his shoulder. Hot glass from the lens in the door singed his face. He hit the floor and crawled down the hall, passing the bedroom until he could roll sideways into the kitchenette. The hitman stopped shooting. He was hurt from the bullet to the vest and he was getting sloppy. Jack could hear the man's back as it slid down the door. He listened as he snapped open the breech with an audible click and rattled loose the spent casings from the cylinder. Jack glanced across the kitchenette to the window above the sink. He could see the grimy metal of the fire escape. His shoulder was bleeding. He pulled a long towel down from the handle of the stove and tied it as best he could around his shoulder and beneath his armpit. He pressed the magazine release and counted his rounds. 4 left. 1 ready to go in the chamber. Had he really only fired 1 shot? He had no backup magazine. The hired gun outside the door was finished loading and blew out the main lock, kicking his way in as the rest of the chains gave way. He could hear him storm down the hall and clear the bedroom. When the bedroom was clear, he made his way, even slower, toward the miniature kitchen. Jack crouched low and crept from the center of the room to the edge of the open doorway. What kind of a fucking priest carries a gun? His steps were moving the green boards of the hallway as he drew closer. Jack made sure to stay low and aimed upward. The floorboards of the hall creaked. The hitman hadn't yet turned the corner. Jack's finger was heavy on the trigger. The phone in the bedroom started ringing again. He could hear him retrace his steps to the bedroom and search for the phone. Jack took his chance and pulled open the locks on the window. He tried to force it open but the frame was fused to the sill. He ran to the next room, a small living area, and hid behind a lone bookcase. The professional entered the small kitchen and walked into the living area with the loaded revolver in both hands. He checked the back of the couch. From behind the slender bookcase, Jack aimed at the back of his knee, then raised his aim to the man's hand. He pulled the trigger and the black latex glove which held the pistol shattered in a mist of red. The pistol was expelled from the stump of his hand and bounced from the couch cushion to the floor below the coffee table. Jack took another shot at his knee and missed. The bullet entered the hitman's thigh and he fell against the wall. Jack kept the gun on him. The professional knew what kind of wound he was facing and kept his good hand on his thigh. "What the fuck kind of priest are you?" "I'm not a priest," he said. "I'm just a conman in a costume who was in the wrong place and the wrong time." Shit. Blood was welling up between his fingers as he pressed on the wound. A steady flow of blood drained from the tangle of latex and flesh above his wrist as well. "Shit," he said again, his face rapidly losing color. "I'm gonna die in this girl's apartment." Jack aimed between his wincing eyes. "You wanna go slow and think about things, or do you want a headshot and just be done with it? I wasn't supposed to die here. Not for that dumb son of a bitch. I was supposed to kill the girl and get paid and disappear. Everyone's gonna know who I am and what I did." "There's no use reflecting," Jack said, studying his shot. "Wait. Don't shoot. Don't you wanna know why?" "Not really. I can make you pretty rich though." "How?" "Senator Rick Graham. 3rd District. State. He used to keep her on the side until she was threatening to go to the press. He's been trying to get this bitch to kill herself for a year. He's been sending calls, getting the power shut off in the building, staging things on the fire escape to look like something leering back at her. He's even poisoned her food so she sees things. She's got mental problems. We thought all she needed was a nudge to get her on a ledge. But she wouldn't do it. She wouldn't take herself out like he wanted. So, I was gonna make it look like a cartel murder or a serial killer." He was desperate. "But tonight, she called the wrong kind of priest. I'm telling you. You can ruin this guy's life. He will pay you whatever you want. Especially, since my cut's off the table. I try not to underestimate desperate men with a lot of power. He'll probably just send someone else like you. I'm the only guy who knows about this. It was between him and me. That's why he thought he could get away with it. And who exactly are you?" "Just a mercenary who did his time in the desert and did what I did to support a habit." "In that case, thank you for your service," Jack said and pulled the trigger. His head disintegrated. An unrecognizable mass of bloody tissue and white skull fragments oozed down the crude plaster into a puddle at Jack's feet. He checked the headless body's pockets for a cell phone and found an antiquated Samsung burner. He had no wallet, but he did manage to find a money clip with $600 wrapped around a half baggie of black tar smack. He discarded the heroin and pocketed the little score. It was more than he might have made on a typical house call. He holstered the P938 and opened the long window, stepping onto the fire escape. It was beginning to rain. He gripped the jagged railing and let the rain fall on his face to hopefully wash away blood that had splattered. He kept his eyes on the windows of the adjacent buildings. There was no one that he could easily see watching him. He picked up his pace. He knew he was going to lay low until the heat blew over, but he wasn't sure if he would blackmail the senator. Depending on how much he could gouge the prick for, he could be looking at a potential retirement. He heard sirens in the distance and his heart raced. He skipped a step and the sole of his shoe caught the fabric of his cassock. A crisp sliver of rust broke off the rail and he fell forward over the barrier. His body turned 180 degrees in free fall. He felt the brief sensation of being cradled by the wind. Lights flashed around him, and his body crushed the hood of the police cruiser.